After studying this module, you shall be able to appreciate how elements are distributed in biological systems. Know about the nature of biogeochemical cycles of carbon and nitrogen. Learn about the components of ecosystem and their use in various activities on Earth. You should also be able to identify the impact of human activities on the cycling of elements in the biosphere. Let us take these points one by one. What do we mean by biodistribution of elements? Let us break down the phrase biodistribution of elements into simpler terms. Bio means biological, distribution, as the meaning suggests, abundance, relative abundance, or where the elements are present. Of course, we are talking of chemical elements. So, biodistribution of elements means the relative abundance of chemical elements in biological or living systems. In almost all life forms on Earth, whether they are in land or in oceans, 4 main elements are present. These elements are carbon, nitrogen, hydrogen and oxygen. They are the chief elements making up most of the body mass of these organisms. These elements, along with sulfur and phosphorus, which are known as macro elements because they are required in larger quantities for body functions. These elements play a structural role. What do we understand by structural role? That is, they are required for the synthesis of biomolecules which are responsible for giving shape and size, not to forget strength, to the body of the organism. Water, a simple compound of hydrogen and oxygen, is essential for all living cells. It can dissolve a variety of ions from the atmosphere and precipitate them down as rain or in aqueous solutions. Carbon can undergo extensive covalent bonding with other carbon atoms as well as with atoms of other elements. Carbon can combine in different proportions to form molecules which can undergo further oxidation or reduction, or they can undergo molecular rearrangement to form complex biomolecules like carbohydrates, amino acids, proteins, etc. The biomolecules are passed from organism to organism through the food chains across the ecosystems. When these organisms die, their body parts decay and the elements are returned back to the environment, that is the soil, the atmosphere, for recycling. This forms the basis of all biogeochemical cycles. Apart from the microelements, there are some elements which are known as the microelements. Micro means small, that is, these elements are required in smaller quantities for body functions. These elements have a more functional role in the body, that is, they generally act as catalysts for bioreactions. For example, molybdenum in some nitrogen fixing bacteria, boron in photosynthetic plants, copper in some enzymes and iron in hemoglobin. Let us now study the biogeochemical cycles in detail. First, we understand what biogeochemical cycle means. Bio simply means living, geo, geological, for example, water, air, soil, rocks, etc. Chemical, of course, refers to the elements, and cycle, the cyclic pathway through which these elements move through the different compartments of Earth. So, basically, a biogeochemical cycle is a cyclic pathway through which any chemical element moves through the biotic, that is the plants, animals, etc., and the abiotic, that is the geological compartments of Earth. It connects the living with the non-living. In these cycles, elements in their elemental form or as compounds in different states of matter are passed from organism to organism across the compartments of the biosphere. Recycling of elements in the biosphere is essential to maintain a state of equilibrium between different parts of the earth. Now, these cycles are not immune to changes in climate. The speed, intensity and balancing of these cycles are severely affected by changes in climate, natural or man-made. In biogeochemical cycles, the elements are either recycled continuously, for example, through the processes like photosynthesis and respiration, or the elements may be accumulated in one place for longer periods of time. For example, in mineral deposits in rocks or seabeds. The area where an element is concentrated, whether for a short time or for a long time, the area where an element is concentrated is known as its biogeochemical pool or reservoir. These can be the atmosphere, the oceans or even the Earth's crust. There are two types of pools in biogeochemical cycles, the active pool and the storage pool. In active pool, the elements or their compounds are present in a form which is easily available to live processes for direct uptake. Storage pools, on the other hand, contain elements which in forms which need to be fixed before the organisms can uptake them. Now, biogeochemical cycles are of two types, gaseous and sedimentary. In gaseous cycles, for example, those of carbon, nitrogen and oxygen, the main pool or reservoir is in the gaseous phase, while other pools may be in atmosphere, water or even land. However, in sedimentary cycles, the main pool is in the lithosphere, that is, the land is the main pool. In sedimentary cycles, on the other hand, the main pool is the lithosphere or land. These cycles are generally slow because the elements get locked up in the rocks or in Earth's crust and they get out of circulation for prolonged periods of time. Carbon cycle. Carbon is an essential element needed by all living organisms. It forms the backbone of all organic molecules, from something as simple as methane to something as complex as the DNA. Carbon is required for the synthesis of all building blocks like proteins, fats, carbohydrates, amino acids, etc. of all life forms. Biosphere contains a complex mixture of carbon compounds which are continuously transformed from one type to another. Probably, carbon is the only element which has got maximum. The number of compounds of carbon are more than the number of compounds of all other elements put together. This speaks volumes about the ability of carbon to form different compounds as well as its importance in biological systems. The active carbon pools are the atmosphere and the oceans, seas, rivers and lakes which contain the dissolved inorganic carbon. In the atmosphere, carbon is present as carbon dioxide. The storage pools of carbon are the carbonate sediments on the ocean floors and the fossil fuels as well as the carbon present in the Earth's crust and mantle. The soil carbon, which comes from the decaying organic non-living matter, also contributes to the global carbon cycle. Let us have a look at the carbon cycle in detail. Plants utilize or convert carbon dioxide to other organic molecules like glucose, cellulose, starch, sugars, etc. through the process of photosynthesis. Animals consume these plants and utilize these organic molecules to derive energy. The respiration of animals then returns carbon dioxide back to the atmosphere. The decomposition of dead plants and animals also returns back carbon dioxide to the atmosphere and other carbon compounds to the soil. However, this does not add to pollution, that is, this does not increase the carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere because it is the same amount of carbon dioxide which was fixed by the green plant in its life cycle. The reaction taking place in photosynthesis is one molecule of CO2 carbon dioxide combines with one molecule of water to form carbohydrates and release oxygen. The reaction taking place in respiration is the reverse of the reaction of photosynthesis. Carbohydrates are burned in the presence of oxygen to release carbon dioxide and water. The terrestrial biosphere considers the organic carbon which is available in all living organisms. Uptake of carbon depends upon the biotic factors and seasonal cycles. During the day, in the presence of sunlight, carbon dioxide concentration decreases because of uptake through photosynthesis by green plants. It starts increasing at dusk when the rate of photosynthesis decreases. In terms of seasonal cycles, the lowest levels of carbon dioxide are observed during the spring season when vegetation increases and photosynthesis is at its peak. Carbon present in the soil can flow off into rivers through erosion or be released back to the environment by soil respiration. Rise in temperature increases the rate of decay of organic matter in soil, thereby releasing the trapped carbon as carbon dioxide. In earlier times, the carbon cycle was considered to be the best or the most balanced amongst all biogeochemical cycles because both the recovery and consumption of carbon dioxide were taking place at comparable rates. But now, the amounts of carbon dioxide that are being released into the atmosphere are increasing at alarming rates. This is because of human interference of burning excessive coal and other fossil fuels. However, the rate of fixation of carbon dioxide through photosynthesis by green plants is rather decreasing because of deforestation. Geological carbon cycle. The cycling of carbon through the geosphere, that is through land, is slower than other parts of the global carbon cycle. Yet, it plays an essential role in determining the concentration of carbon in the atmosphere as well as global temperature. Most of the carbon on Earth is stored in inert forms in the lithosphere. 80% of this carbon is present in limestone and its derivatives. Limestone is formed from the sedimentation of shells of marine organisms which are rich in calcium carbonate. The remaining 20% of carbon is present in shale rocks which are rich in kerogen. Kerogen is a precursor of fossil fuels. Kerogen is a mixture of organic compounds which, when subjected to high temperature and pressure conditions in the Earth's crust, release high molecular weight hydrocarbons, that is crude oil or natural gas. These changes occur over millions of years, thereby effectively trapping carbon in the geosphere for long periods of time. Carbon can return back to the biogeochemical cycles in different ways. Carbon dioxide is released during the metamorphosis of carbonate rocks under heat and pressure in the Earth's mantle. This carbon dioxide comes back into the atmosphere and oceans through volcanic eruptions. Humans also play their role in the depletion of carbon from the geosphere by extracting and burning fossil fuels. This also releases carbon into the atmosphere. The marine carbon cycle. Oceans are the second largest active reservoirs of carbon after the lithosphere. The atmospheric carbon dioxide is in equilibrium with the ocean surface, which is rich in dissolved inorganic carbon or DIC. The dissolved inorganic carbon is present as carbonate. The deep layers of the ocean are 15% richer in dissolved organic carbon. The dissolved inorganic carbon is present for longer periods of time in the deeper layers of oceans, making them 15% more richer compared to the surface layers. Thermal currents exchange carbon between the deep layers and the surface layers. The inorganic carbon can be converted into organic carbon through photosynthesis by marine organisms, mostly phytoplanktons. Dissolved inorganic carbon also enters the oceans through rivers. Organic carbon either moves through the food chain or sinks into the deeper layers as shells, where it eventually turns into sediments. The oceans have a limited capacity to sequester carbon dioxide. That is, the oceans cannot go on absorbing the excess of atmospheric carbon dioxide. Absorption of CO2 makes water acidic. This affects the marine life forms, thereby upsetting the marine ecosystem. An increase in the acidity of water also decreases the deposition of calcium sediments, thereby reducing the capacity of oceans to consume carbon dioxide. Impacts of human activities on carbon cycle. Carbon exists in the atmosphere mainly either as CO2 or as methane. Both these gases can absorb and preserve heat in the atmosphere for longer times, and therefore they are responsible for maintaining the temperatures on Earth. But if their amounts increase, then they can also lead to global warming. Human activities directly release large amounts of carbon into the atmosphere by burning fossil fuels and by changing the terrestrial and ocean ecosystem, thus impacting the carbon cycle. Deforestation also affects the carbon cycle, not only by releasing the soil carbon directly into the atmosphere, but also by decreasing the fixation of carbon dioxide through photosynthesis. The soil carbon can also pass on to rivers and to marine ecosystems through erosion. Increased levels of carbon dioxide also increases the rate of photosynthesis in plants, as it allows plants to take up more carbon dioxide. But with more photosynthesis taking place, plants require more water to fix the absorbed CO2. This can increase the chances of drought-like conditions in many regions of the earth. Moving on to the nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen, like carbon, is an important element of the ecosystem. It is an essential component of amino acids, which are the building blocks of all enzymes and proteins, both structural as well as functional. It is also required for the formation of DNA and RNA, which are the main genetic code carriers in all forms of life: plants, animals, bacteria, and even viruses. Since nitrogen is an important constituent of all the biomolecules, it indirectly plays an important role in photosynthesis in green plants. In chlorophyll molecule, the first step, which is the absorption of radiation, takes place by a protein molecule which initiates the reaction. The active pool of nitrogen is the soil on Earth's crust. It contains inorganic nitrogen as well as organic nitrogen from decaying organic matter. The atmosphere, despite containing 78% nitrogen, is a storage pool because nitrogen as N2 is inert. The sediments are also storage pools of nitrogen. Let us have a look at the atmospheric nitrogen cycle. The atmospheric nitrogen cycle is the equilibrium between the inorganic nitrogen gas, that is N2, and the organic nitrogen in the soil and the atmosphere. Organic nitrogen can be present in many forms such as ammonium, nitrite, nitrate, nitrous oxide, nitric oxide, etc. The nitrogen cycle involves transformation of nitrogen from one form to another through various processes like nitrogen fixation, assimilation, ammonification, nitrification, and denitrification. These biological and physical processes are mostly carried out by microbes which either derive energy from this process or require nitrogen in a particular form for their growth. Nitrogen fixation. The Earth's atmosphere contains about 78% of nitrogen as N2, but N2 is chemically inert because of high bond energy. Thus, it is not suitable for biological use and needs to be fixed in a more usable form before plants or animals can take it up. There are three types of fixation processes: atmospheric fixation, biological fixation, and industrial fixation. Let us have a look at them one by one. Atmospheric fixation. It occurs when lightning strikes and converts the molecular nitrogen and oxygen to nitrogen oxides. These nitrogenous compounds are then washed down to the soil by rainfall. The biological fixation of nitrogen is done by microorganisms in soil which convert nitrogen oxides to nitrites and nitrates. Nitrifying bacteria like Azotobacter and Rhizobium found in the roots of leguminous plants convert the molecular nitrogen to ammonia. In aquatic ecosystems, this fixation is done by blue-green algae. The reaction taking place is 2 nitrogen molecules combined with 6 water molecules to release 4 molecules of ammonia and 3 of oxygen. The ammonia released further combines with water in equal proportion and with carbon dioxide to form amino acids and release oxygen. Industrial fixation. The industrial fixation of nitrogen to ammonia occurs by the Haber's process. In this process, nitrogen gas and hydrogen from petroleum or natural gas react in a 1:3 ratio in the presence of a catalyst at high temperature and high pressure. Ammonia obtained by this method is further converted into fertilizers like ammonium nitrate and urea. Assimilation. Plants can absorb nitrate, nitrite or ammonium ions from the soil through their root hairs. The absorbed nitrate is sequentially converted to nitrite and ammonium, which are incorporated into amino acids, nucleic acids and chlorophyll. In leguminous plants, The symbiotically associated rhizobium bacteria assimilates nitrogen directly from the nodules through a complex exchange of amino acids. Many bacteria like Azotobacter are capable of utilizing inorganic compounds like ammonium ions as their sole source of nitrogen. Animals, fungi and other heterotrophic organisms that cannot fix their own nitrogen obtain it by the ingestion of amino acids, nucleotides and other small organic molecules synthesized by the plants. Ammonification. Organic nitrogen from dead plants and animal waste is converted back into ammonia by the action of bacteria or fungi. This process, also known as mineralization, is the reverse of assimilation and involves many enzymatic reactions. Nitrification. The nitrifying bacteria like Nitrosomonas present in the soil oxidize ammonium to nitrate, which is further oxidized to nitrate by Nitrobacter. Ammonia is toxic to plants, so its oxidation to nitrites and nitrates is essential for their survival. Due to high solubility of nitrates, they can percolate into groundwater or even into drinking water. High levels of nitrate in drinking water can lead to the blue baby syndrome, that is, lowering of blood oxygen levels in infants. High concentration of nitrates can also lead to eutrophication, that is, high growth of blue-green algae in streams and lakes, sometimes covering the entire surface of the water body, blocking out sunlight, affecting the growth of fish and other organisms and thereby unbalancing the aquatic ecosystem. Denitrification. This is the last step in the nitrogen cycle in which nitrates are reduced to nitrogen under anaerobic conditions and they are released back into the atmosphere. Anaerobic bacteria like Pseudomonas and Clostridium use nitrate in their respiration. In anaerobic respiration, nitrate ion acts as the electron acceptor, which in aerobic respiration, by the way, is done by the oxygen molecule. So, in anaerobic respiration, the nitrate ion acts as an electron acceptor and releases molecular nitrogen, which cannot be used by plants. Moving on to the marine nitrogen cycle. The marine or oceanic nitrogen cycle is also an important process. The overall cycle is similar to the atmospheric nitrogen cycle in the sense that it involves the same processes of assimilation, ammonification, nitrification and denitrification. However, the types of organisms participating in this cycle and the mechanisms by which the transformation of nitrogen take place are different. The distribution of nitrogen and its forms is greatly varied depending on factors like depth of the layer, proximity to shore and seasonal temperature variations. There are three ways in which nitrogen can enter into the water bodies. Number one, by precipitation, that is as rain, snow, hail, sleet, etc. Or number two, it can flow in from rivers. And lastly, in even small amounts, it can even be dissolved from the atmosphere. Just like plants in the atmospheric cycle, the phytoplanktons in oceans also cannot use molecular nitrogen directly. In oceans, the cyanobacteria as compared to the Azotobacter and Rhizobium on land are responsible for fixing nitrogen to biological forms that can be taken up for organic synthesis. Phytoplankton assimilate the organic nitrogen and release out ammonia and urea in water. Ammonia can then be converted to ammonium ions by bacterial activity. Ammonium ions undergo nitrification to nitrites and nitrate. Denitrification releases back molecular nitrogen to the atmosphere. The nitrite ions and the ammonium ions are intermediates in the nitrogen cycle. That is, they are generated in one step and used up in some other step. Therefore, their concentration generally does not rise very much. For the nitrite ions, the rate of production, which is from assimilation, nitrification and denitrification steps, and the rate of consumption are comparable. The concentration of nitrates in the ocean is about 1000 times higher than the oceanic ammonium concentration. Let us now have a look at the impact of human activities on the nitrogen cycle. The conversion of nitrogen to biological forms has almost doubled due to a variety of human activities. These include excessive cultivation of leguminous plants like pulses, soya, etc. to meet the increasing food needs, increasing production and use of chemical fertilizers, vehicular and industrial pollution, unchecked burning of fossil fuels. The global nitrogen cycle has been affected by the release of nitrogenous gases into the atmosphere and water. The global nitrogen cycle has been severely affected by the release of nitrogenous gases into the atmosphere and the water bodies, thereby decreasing the quality of the air we breathe and the water we drink. Over the years, due to excessive use of nitrogenous fertilizers, burning of biomass and emissions from industries, the concentration of N2O, that is nitrous oxide, has increased in the atmosphere. High levels of N2O in the atmosphere are very dangerous for Earth because it not only increases the global temperatures by contributing as a greenhouse gas, but it also depletes the ozone layer. The atmospheric concentration of ammonia has increased to thrice its value due to human activities in the name of development. Ammonia dissolves in water to form nitric acid, which precipitates as acid rain. Acid rain is detrimental not only to the health of animals, fishes and plants, but also to the health of humans. Acid rain can cause respiratory damage in human beings, and it can also cause damage to property like the yellowing of the marbles of Taj Mahal. Both ammonia and nitrous oxide act as aerosols which stick to the water droplets and lead to the formation of smog close to the surface of Earth, especially in winters when the temperatures are low. Smog again causes reduced visibility and respiratory problems in humans. Environmental issues. The increasing concentration of biological nitrogen has caused an imbalance in the global nitrogen cycle. Human activities like burning of fossil fuels, production of synthetic fertilizers by a Haber-Bosch method, and release of ammonia from wastewater treatment plants is adding to the already high concentrations of nitrogen. Ammonia in high levels is fatal for fish. High concentrations of inorganic nitrogen increases the acidity of water, causes eutrophication in water bodies, and may be toxic for animals and humans. Eutrophication can lead to the death of aquatic animals because of decrease in dissolved oxygen levels and lesser availability of sunlight. What we have learned in this module? The term biogeochemical cycle means a cyclic pathway through which chemical elements move through the biotic, that is the plants and animals, and the abiotic or the geological compartments of the earth. The elements may be recycled continuously or be stored at one place for a long time. Carbon is an essential element needed by all living organisms. It forms the backbone of all organic molecules and is required for the synthesis of building blocks like proteins, fats, carbohydrates, amino acids, etc. in all living organisms. In the atmosphere, carbon is present as carbon dioxide. Plants convert carbon dioxide to organic molecules like glucose through photosynthesis. Animals consume the plants to derive energy for their body functions. The respiration of animals then returns CO2 back to the atmosphere. Human activities like burning of fossil fuels also releases large amounts of carbon into the atmosphere, thus impacting the global carbon cycle. High concentrations of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere can cause global warming. Nitrogen is an essential component of amino acids, which are the building blocks of all enzymes and proteins, both structural and functional. It is also required in the formation of DNA and RNA, which are the main genetic code carriers in all forms of life. The atmospheric nitrogen cycle is the equilibrium between the inorganic nitrogen gas and the organic nitrogen present in the soil and the atmosphere. Nitrogen cycle involves transformation of nitrogen from one form to another through processes like nitrogen fixation, assimilation, ammonification, nitrification and denitrification. Global nitrogen cycle has been severely affected by the release of nitrogenous gases into the atmosphere and water bodies. High levels of N2O in the atmosphere increase the global temperature by contributing as a greenhouse gas. It also decreases or damages the ozone layer. Ammonia dissolves in water to form nitric acid, which precipitates as acid rain. This can cause damage to the respiratory system in humans. Both ammonia and NO2 act as aerosols which stick to the water droplets and lead to the formation of smog closer to the surface of Earth.